This is WKRN, Channel 2, Nashville.
Good evening, I'm Hugh Downs.
And I'm Barbara Walters, and this is 2020.
On the ABC News Magazine, 2020, with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters. Tonight, convicted of rape, he may be innocent, but even before the trial, a brutal sentence was carried out.
I'm thinking, gosh, I don't want to die. You know, there's this pistol sticking to my head here. I don't want to die, so maybe I better do what these guys tell me.
In Arkansas, vigilante justice and a corrupt sheriff.
I have no comment for 2020.
But others have talked of strange events and perverse use of power. Tom Jarrell investigates the Law and Sheriff Conlee. The last steps to keep a promise made in Vietnam. Two good buddies. One was killed after saving the other's life.
I told myself that when I got back from Vietnam, that I was going to look up Mrs. Bowman.
But for 23 years, he couldn't bring himself to do it, as Bowman's family grew up on their own.
The only thing I remember is standing in the church, and my father's casket was behind us, and the preacher asked us to come up.
Tonight, Stone Phillips, with a priceless moment that changed these lives forever, a promise finally kept. Off with their heads. It gave birth to an institution, the most famous wax museum in the world. Today, the tradition continues as Bob Brown discovers who's in, who's out, how they do it, and why we love it. The fascinating Madame Tussauds.
It can lead to one of the worst miscarriages of justice, the acts of a vigilante, a person who takes the law into his own hands. But what if the vigilante wears a badge, an officer of the law who not only makes arrests, but who acts as judge and delivers punishment, too? Well, tonight, from Arkansas, we have the story of such a man.
Renegade Southern sheriffs are both real and part of American folklore. Men who are tough, ornery, and bent on their own crusades. Coolidge Conlee was all of these, and now questions have been raised about his connection with a particularly ghoulish crime. Tom Jarrell has a story that must be told, because not only was the victim horribly mutilated, he may also be wrongly imprisoned.
Arkansas's fertile Mississippi River Delta. In the heart of this lush agricultural region lies St. Francis County. Forest City, the county seat, appears to be an all-American town. Its quiet streets, weathered buildings, and generally friendly atmosphere make it seem indeed a peaceful place. Those are the appearances, but in actuality, Forest City is a hotbed of crime. Arson, auto theft, extortion, racketeering, official corruption became a way of life. And then 3 years ago, Forest City became the scene of an unsolved crime of vengeance, the sexual emasculation of a rape suspect. It was a crime so brutal and so reprehensible, it shocked the rest of Arkansas. Ironically, this near-total breakdown of justice was not caused by the mob or any other conventional criminal element. It was caused by this man, former Sheriff Coolidge Conlee. Conlee's misconduct became so blatant that the federal government finally stepped in. In November, Conlee was convicted of racketeering, extortion, and running a professional gambling operation out of his sheriff's department. Investigators say, as serious as those offenses are, Conlee's criminal activity was far more extensive than that. Conlee has steadfastly refused to talk to us about any of these charges.
Well, I have no comment for 2020.
Although the bantam-sized Conlee hardly fits anyone's stereotype of the outlaw Southern sheriff, residents like O'Neill Webb, who knew him, say he would not hesitate to use violence against his enemies.
I heard him say he'd get a man killed for $500.
Fred Odom was a captain in the Arkansas State Police and investigated Conlee for years.
I guess I would call him a kingpin in a small mafia-type organization in the South.
In fact, Conlee, who's now 64, has a history of troubles with the law. In 1954, he was convicted in neighboring Tennessee for gambling. And in 1963, he was convicted here at the federal courthouse in Little Rock on 4 counts of willful failure to file income tax returns. Despite his criminal record, Conlee was elected sheriff in 1980 and started a gambling ring that operated right out of the sheriff's department. Deputy Robert Smith once lost $1,200 in a single roll to the sheriff.
Some big bucks exchange hands?
Yeah, $50, $100, $200, $300, $400.
Were deputies going out in the county and busting people, arresting games out in the county for that much or smaller sums?
Oh, much smaller. Much smaller. I knew one as small as $35 that they took.
Small-time gamblers testified at Conlee's trial that to avoid arrest, they were forced to pay bribes to this man, Sambo Hughes. Hughes was Conlee's chief deputy and apparently was also Conlee's chief bag man. Hughes was indicted with Conlee, but turned state's evidence and testified against him at the trial. Seen here with his wife, Dora, Hughes said he told those he extorted,
If you're going to gamble, you're going to pay. And if you don't pay, if you're going to gamble, we're going to arrest you. It's just that simple.
Conlee also levied illegal fines for criminal offenses without consulting any court. Some of those fines went into this drawer, which was known to deputies as the peculiar drawer. But apparently the money Conlee raised from gambling and extortion wasn't enough. He borrowed and had the most remarkable credit rating in town. The local power structure and this bank loaned him $1.2 million. For a man who made $24,000 per year as sheriff, Conlee was able to borrow huge amounts in unsecured loans. And according to former State Police Captain Odom, Conlee also arranged the arson of his crop dusting service, sold confiscated drugs to jail inmates, and tried to sell stolen cars off his used car lot.
I was totally embarrassed. I was embarrassed by the fact that the state police, that I was a member of the state police, and the state police was not doing anything.
With no place else to turn, the frustrated Fred Odom went to this television reporter, Jack Hill, to expose Conlee. At the time, Hill was an investigative reporter for television station KAIT in Jonesboro, Arkansas. It didn't take Jack Hill and his television camera long to become a thorn in the side of Coolidge Conlee.
I've heard him say, you know, that everything was going pretty well until Jack Hill came in and started causing all this static.
Jack Hill's static was very nearly silenced forever on the night of June 9th, 1985. Hill and a cameraman were here on a public road staking out this house, known to be used as a gambling casino. Hill attempted to interview the owner of the house, Calvin Adams, a friend of Sheriff Conlee's.
Can you tell me what's going on inside the house?
Yeah, we're having a birthday party.
Whose birthday?
Delton Cummings.
Delton Cummings.
Yeah, you want to see him?
You want to let us in there?
No.
Why don't you let us...
Adams whipped Hill with a microphone and then turned his rage on the cameraman.
And he turns the television camera into a lethal weapon, and he is throwing the television camera against the news car with all the force that he has, which is a lot. And a television camera is exploding, you know. I mean, pieces are flying like shrapnel.
Fearing for his life, the cameraman escaped in the car, leaving Jack Hill to fend for himself. Hill hid out in the woods for 2 hours before being rescued by Fred Odom and several heavily armed state troopers. Conlee was seen fleeing from the scene of the beating as Odom roared up with his blue lights flashing.
So I get out with my gun, my rifle. I didn't know what was to come down.
When you went in to find Jack, did it occur to you that you might face an armed confrontation with other law enforcement officers that night?
Yeah, I had my gun with me and had it with me for that purpose.
Even though the videotape clearly shows the attack on Jack Hill was unprovoked, the local prosecutor has refused to pursue charges against Calvin Adams. A month after this beating, in August 1985, Jack Hill and Fred Odom came to 2020 with the story of Coolidge Conlee's misconduct. They also added an incredible element that made Conlee's other misdeeds pale in comparison. They said they had evidence that Conlee, the county's top law enforcement officer, had orchestrated the castration of a rape suspect they believed to be innocent. 2020 investigated what they told us, and here's what we found. The events that triggered the mutilation began at this house on September 11th, 1984. According to police reports, the teenage daughter of one of Forest City's most powerful families was surprised by a man with a pistol and raped. The girl's father, Walter Stevens III, was the county's elected coroner and was a close personal friend of Sheriff Coolidge Conlee's. Following the rape, the local police department received immense pressure from the girl's family to solve the crime. They picked up this innocent man, Ricky White, who was identified as the rapist by the girl, but he provided an airtight alibi and was cleared. According to Fred Odom, the state police then pointed out that this man, Wayne Dumont, might fit the bill. In 1973, Dumont had been convicted in Tacoma, Washington for second-degree assault and received a suspended sentence. And 3 years later, he was arrested on 2 counts of rape in DeWitt, Arkansas. But both those charges were dropped by the women involved. By 1984, Dumont, age 35, had remarried and moved to Forest City to start a new life. A decorated Vietnam veteran, he worked at the local Holiday Inn as a maintenance man and was once honored as Employee of the Month. His wife, Dusty, looked after their 3 children and worked at a nearby electronics factory. In November, Dumont's new life was shattered when he was arrested for the rape. He was put in a police lineup, but the girl had a problem identifying him, according to Deputy Hank Leary, who was there.
The first lineup, he was not identified.
Leary says the girl then was taken behind closed doors by her father and a police officer. When she returned, she identified Wayne Dumont as the rapist.
Is it possible they got the wrong guy?
Very possible.
After the arrest, Odom says a source told him the rape victim's father vowed revenge against Wayne Dumont, claiming,
"If you don't believe me, well, watch the papers in the next 3 days."
And 3 days later, here at Dumont's home, something did happen. 2 men forced their way in and castrated him.
They rushed me, got me down on the floor, and they bound my hands behind me. The little guy, he's got this pistol. He's got it all poked down at my head here, talking crazy. I'm thinking, gosh, I don't want to die. You know, there's this pistol sticking to my head here. I don't want to die, so maybe I better do what these guys tell me. And I can see what they're doing. I can, and it hurt. I mean, gosh. I'm bleeding. I'm bad bleeding. I can't do nothing about it. They're leaving. And one of them, it sounded as, maybe that sound, like, you know, one of them was patting the other on the back, and he says, "Good job." And the other says, "Yeah. Yeah, Mr. C, be proud."
Who did you take Mr. C, the words they used, to be?
It came to my attention later that Coolidge Conlee had been referred to as Mr. C.
Coolidge Conlee was one of the first people to arrive at the scene. He stayed about 4 hours and asked state police investigators for permission to take Dumont's severed testicles with him when he left.
Did he take them for scientific evaluation? No. Conlee has testified his first stop after leaving the crime scene was here at the funeral home owned by the father of the girl who said Wayne Dumont had raped her.
In sworn testimony, the father admitted the sheriff brought him the body parts. He was also asked if he had discussed the possibility that something could happen to Dumont and answered, "Why, certainly," but denied he took any action. He's consistently refused to talk with 2020. The next day, Conlee put the body parts out on display at the sheriff's department and bragged to O'Neill Webb.
He said, "That's Dumont." And he said, "That's what you get when they rape the wrong woman in my county."
At first, Conlee told local reporters he was working diligently to solve the castration.
We've talked to approximately from 100 to 150 different people about the thing, and we don't have anything to go on, period.
But finally, the sheriff advanced a bizarre cover-up. He said Dumont castrated himself and even got 2 state troopers to go along with his story. Fred Odom couldn't believe it.
I said, "You 2 grown men think that this man tied himself up, hog-tied himself up, and then cut himself with a surgical knife and twice and castrated himself?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous."
Odom had better leads to work on. This man, Charlie Hickman, a career criminal and longtime associate of Sheriff Conlee's, called Odom from jail and tried to make a deal. Odom asked him if he knew who ordered the castration. Hickman admits he bragged in jail to other prisoners that he participated in the castration. But when we asked him about it, he changed his story.
Did you do it? Did you castrate that man?
No, I didn't. I've cut a hog or 2, but never a man.
After the castration, Dumont's home was burned down by arsonists, and he was warned to get his wife and children out of town.
My family all split up. One child went to one state, and another child went to another state, and my wife and I went into hiding, if you will, until time for the trial.
No one was arrested for the fire, and neighbors didn't even bother to report it. With his house burned down, his family forced to hide, having been castrated and no suspect for the castration in custody, Dumond was put on trial in 1985 for a rape he says he did not commit. The strongest testimony against Dumond was scientific evidence provided by a state crime lab expert and the courtroom identification from the girl.
Is the man who took you from your home to those woods and raped you in this courtroom?
Yes, sir.
Will you tell the jury where he is situated and which one he is?
Right there in the white shirt.
As he has since the day he was arrested, Wayne Dumond proclaimed his innocence at the trial.
But God is my witness, I didn't rape that girl.
But the jury didn't believe him. They convicted him and sentenced him to life, plus 20 years in prison. 2 years later, Wayne Dumond asked this genetics expert, Dr. Moses Shanfield, to examine the scientific evidence which had been used to convict him. Dr. Shanfield, who is frequently called as an expert witness by the FBI, was appalled by the testimony of the state crime laboratory expert. Shanfield's report said flatly, the genetic markers of Wayne Dumond do not match those of the rapist.
It's my scientific opinion that Wayne Dumond is not the donor of the semen and therefore not the rapist in this case.
And that means?
He is an innocent person.
But Coolidge Conlee is not an innocent person. Although Conlee has not yet been charged in the castration, in December, a federal judge called his other crimes heinous and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. And last August, a federal jury citing outrageous conduct ordered Conlee to pay Wayne Dumond $150,000 for publicly displaying Dumond's mutilated parts. Meanwhile, in Arkansas's notorious Cummings maximum security prison, Wayne Dumond remains incarcerated, but he has not given up hope.
There's evidence now. I mean, I've got scientific evidence from one of the best forensic scientists in this country. All I can do is just keep one day at a time. Keep hoping, praying. Eventually, somewhere along the line, somebody will listen to me.
Will they, Tom? Will someone listen and change things? What's the future for Wayne Dumond?
Barbara, already the Arkansas State Supreme Court has turned down his appeal. He will stay in jail as far as they're concerned. He does have a new attorney, John Wesley Hall of Little Rock, who is taking it through federal channels, hoping to overturn that conviction. He might be released and free man within a matter of months, or he may remain just where he is for the rest of his life.
I know you've got a cold and it's affecting your voice. Let me ask you one more question, rather delicate. Can he function as a normal man?
I asked his wife specifically that, and she said yes. With proper medical treatment and hormone injections, he can be a normal husband.
Thank you, Tom. Feel better soon.
Thanks.
Well, next, some of your favorite personalities frozen in time. A walk through the world's most famous wax museum, Bob Brown at Madame Tussaud. But next, these three people never knew their father. He was killed in Vietnam after saving this man's life. Stone Phillips reports a promise finally kept. Don't miss this.
2020, brought to you by Minwax Wood Finishes. Minwax makes it easy to get professional results. Bring out the beauty with wood finishing products by Minwax.
Do it yourself. Do it for yourself. Do yourself proud with Minwax and Wood. Get a beautiful color that's like no other.
With Minwax Wood Finish to highlight the grain.
And for lasting protection with absolute perfection.
Top it with fast-drying Minwax polyurethane.
It's easy, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. Do yourself proud with Minwax and Wood.
Say, lady, want to do lunch? All right, let's add the amount of protein in this filet, vitamin A in this broccoli. Yes, dear, all together with some nice rice. All this nutrition sound delish? Well, it's all here in new, better-tasting Purina Dog Chow. All the nutrition you need, all the taste you want with Purina Dog Chow. I just add one thing. Come here, girl. Yeah, lady, it's my baby, my dog.
My Toyota, I love
did I buy this 89 Tussaud? 3 reasons. 1, as debating team captain, I'm making a point about quality. Toyota means quality. 2, as an economics major, I'm studying the affordability factor. Tussauds are very affordable. And 3, as homecoming queen, I just wanted to show off a little.
Who could ask for anything more?
Here's why these members of the United States ski team prefer Alka-Seltzer Plus cold medicine.
I came down with some mean cold symptoms. I was congested, I was tired, I couldn't breathe through my nose. I took Alka-Seltzer Plus and it helped to remove those cold symptoms.
I've got a number of guys that are depending on me, and I have to be out there the next day. And Alka-Seltzer Plus really helps me do that.
Alka-Seltzer Plus cold medicine. Fast, effective relief for tough winter colds. Try Alka-Seltzer Plus nighttime cold medicine to relieve your cold at night.
Summer Olympic stars shine in a special gymnastics showcase. Gold medalist Elena Shushanova, Vladimir Artemov, and American medalist Phoebe Mills headline the Panasonic Gymnastics Tour of Champions. Plus, Olympic medalists Zurbriggen and Mueller challenge the world's most dangerous downhill in World Cup skiing. All on ABC's Wide World of Sports, Saturday.
A promise. A promise finally kept after almost 25 years. Perhaps it has taken that long for this country to show respect to those who served in Vietnam. Perhaps it has taken that long for Vietnam veterans to proudly hold reunions, and for families who lost those they loved to publicly reach out and comfort each other. These can be very powerful and healing encounters. Recently, Stone Phillips watched one unfold. What did you see? An emotional meeting of the family of a Green Beret killed in the war and his buddy who made it home.
That's a picture right there. That's where our camp was. And that's a rice paddy right there outside of it. Now, here's a good one of the A-team. Now, that's a complete team right there. That's the village of An Quy.
This moment in Ed Morris's Idaho home is the first step of a remarkable journey.
Hey, this is a picture here, Melissa. This is some of the A-team here.
It's a journey that started when Ed's wife, Linda, drew out of her husband the painful truth that behind his inner torment over the war in Vietnam, there was a name she'd never heard and a promise he had never kept.
Ed and I were married for about 13, 14 years before he really started opening up about Vietnam. It took him that long. I'd find some pictures or things like that and ask him about them. And he was reluctant to talk about them. He said, just put them away, that's in the past, you know, and he cut me off short. Especially, it seemed like during the month of May, you know, he seemed to sort of go into a slump of some sort. And I just asked him about it one time. I said, what's wrong? And tears started running down his face, and that he just opened up to me. And then he told me. That was the first that I ever knew about him, about Bowman.
The name was William T. Bowman, Staff Sergeant, Green Beret, and Ed Morris's closest friend in Vietnam. As members of the Special Forces A-Team, Morris and Bowman were among the first Americans assigned to the front lines in the Binh Dinh province in the fall of 1964. They spent their days leading South Vietnamese platoons in combat, and in less than 6 months, forged an unshakable friendship, the kind soldiers never forget.
We'd spend many hours in what we call the trenches in a defensive position, and at that time you sit there and you talk. And Bowman talked a lot about his family, about home. When we first went to Vietnam, he had the 2 boys, and his wife was pregnant. And when you have time, many hours that you're just sitting there trying to keep awake, you learn a lot about an individual.
And you were particularly close to Bowman?
Yes, I was. You just have to know him. He wasn't a boisterous individual. He wasn't loud. He was very unique, quiet, a good friend.
And a good soldier. Ed says if it weren't for Bowman, he would not have survived a Viet Cong ambush that happened when he was on the point.
The Viet Cong had moved into the village, and they had opened fire on my position, and he had me pinned down. Somebody had me pinned down in there. And I looked back, and there was nobody with me. And what had happened is the Vietnamese would not come any closer. They said, Buku VC, which is mini VC. And they wouldn't come any closer. Well, Bowman himself moved up and set up another crossfire to take the relief off of me then I got up and got out of there. So I guess you might say he saved my life. Yeah, I don't know. I know he got me out of a tough spot.
It was a favor Ed never got the chance to return. On May 5th, 1965, Bowman volunteered to lead an extra patrol to relieve a tired Green Beret. 2 days later, he stepped on a mine. Ed was sent to recover his dead friend's body and stayed with it all night to guard it from the enemy. He was racked with the inevitable guilt of a soldier who couldn't save his best friend's life or even be there to say goodbye.
At that time, you didn't want the Viet Cong to get any of your buddies' bodies, because there was actually a reward for their head, and they mutilated the bodies. It was a long night. I can remember that, and I was scared.
And it was that same night in May 65 that Ed made a promise over Bowman's dead body that has burned inside him for all of these years.
I told myself that when I got back from Vietnam, that I was going to look up Mrs. Bowman, and I was going to tell her what a wonderful man Bill was. And I didn't do it.
Why didn't you do it when you first came back?
I had good intentions of doing that. But the way things were then, when I came home with all the anti-Vietnam movement, it kind of made us feel like maybe we should have been ashamed of what we were doing. We got home, we tried to forget about it. Just wipe it out of your mind and forget it.
Ed's tour in Vietnam ended 5 weeks after Bowman's death. When he returned to the United States, he took a job as a smoke jumper, parachuting into fire zones for the U.S. Forest Service. Now 46 years old, he travels the country as part of a national command force that trains young firefighters from the Smoky Mountains to the Alaskan Rockies. But a busy career and the peacefulness of this mountain retreat near his home in Idaho never really eased the emotional burning inside. And eventually, the memories of Vietnam followed him even here. When you're up there, spending time up there alone, do you think about Bowman very much?
I have in the last, I guess, couple years. Things have happened that this started to surface. About 2 years ago, I was at a training session, and it all came back then real heavy. A buddy called me one night about 11 o'clock, and he says, Ed, he says, there's a young Green Beret down here in the lobby that I just met, and he would like to talk to you since you was in the forces. And I said, oh, what about? And he says, well, he's looking for anybody that knew his dad or had any inkling about his dad because his dad's an MIA.
When Ed came home and he related that to me, it just really tore him apart, because he was saying, what if Bowman's kids are wandering around looking for someone that knew their father?
And then I got to thinking, you know, a long time ago, I'd made a commitment also that when I came home, I was going to find the family of Bowman, who was my buddy who was killed in Vietnam.
And I said, Lord, if there's any possible way that that I can help set this to rest for him, would you please help me?
Linda Morris says her prayer was answered early last year when she heard someone on television talking about a service that for $16.95 helped people locate lost friends. Was it possible they could find the Bowmans? At first, she thought it was too good to be true, but the man who ran the service was himself a Vietnam veteran, and Linda figured for less than $20, why not? This could be the closest she'd ever come to helping her husband come to terms with his past. So the next day, Linda sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Less than 2 months later, she got an answer. The Bowmans had been found.
I told him what I'd done, and he just broke down. And he said that he just couldn't believe that it was possible that he was finally going to be able to follow through with a commitment that he had made to himself.
The two small boys Ed remembered so well from Bowman's photographs are now grown up. When they found out that a friend of their father's from Vietnam wanted to meet them and their families, they were stunned. Scott Bowman is now 28 and works at a chemical plant near Franklinton, North Carolina. Tommy's 29 and a blacksmith in Kentucky. And like the young Green Beret Ed Morris met, they too had spent years searching for veterans who might have served with their father.
We used to go around and talk to men that were a member of the 5th Group and Special Forces and see if they knew our father. And I'd always choose the older ones, those that had a little bit of age I knew that would be back. And of course, none of them ever heard of him or knew him.
I never knew him. I don't really remember nothing about him. The only thing I remember is standing in the church, and my father's casket was behind us, and the preacher asked us to come up to the front of the church. I remember looking out over the audience, and that's about all I remember.
Kimberly is the daughter Bowman never knew. She was born in March 1965, while he was in Vietnam. She's now 23 and married with a daughter of her own. And like her brothers, she was anxious to meet Ed Morris, but had no idea what to expect. But there was one member of the Bowman family who was neither curious nor interested. Mrs. Bowman never remarried. When she heard that Ed Morris wanted to come to see her in North Carolina, she was startled and reluctant to dig up the painful feelings she had tried so long to put behind her.
I was surprised, but also guarded. I didn't even want to dwell on it or think on it, really.
But despite her mixed feelings, Mrs. Bowman decided to go through with it for the children. The war had taken away their father. She would not deny them the chance to learn more about what kind of man he was.
Being able to meet somebody that tell me something about my father. Like I say, if he likes to hunt, did he like to fish? Did he talk about us a lot over in Vietnam? Or just anything. So I can tell my son about his grandfather.
Finally, a date was set. As Ed Morris and his family flew to North Carolina, the Bowmans gathered at Scott's home in Franklinton. Are you nervous about this meeting?
Well, it's awakening old feelings, really, that I hope I can deal with.
Then the moment arrived.
Kim! Right there. You get out all right, honey?
For Ed Morris, this journey to set aside 23 years of guilt and anguish had come down to a short walk with his wife and daughter through these North Carolina pines to the Bowman's doorstep.
I see Tommy. Scott? How you doing? God bless you, son. Miss Bowman. Good morning. Thanks, so good to finally see you. These are for you. Praise the Lord. This is gotta be Kimberly.
Hi. Thank you for letting us come.
So good to see you, son. Thank the Lord.
Good to see you.
Oh, this is great. Oh, I'd love to. This is my wife, Linda. Sorry. And my daughter, Melissa.
Within less than a minute, it was apparent to everyone that there was a strong, instantaneous connection, and that this was going to be an afternoon full of emotion for a family haunted by long unanswered questions, and a man with an overwhelming need to pay his long overdue respects.
I'd have been here 23 years, a little over 23 years ago. But the Lord just didn't allow it then for a reason. And he's answered prayers now.
I finally get to meet my buddy's folks. And I want you to be so proud of him, because I was. We lived together in Vietnam. We trained together, and we fought together. And he's somebody you can be real proud of, real proud of. And I know you are. This is for you and your family. You can go over those photos later if you like and talk about them. I also have something here that I brought for each one of the children, and I know you probably already got one, but this is the crest. And this is the crest that your father wore, or one like it, that he wore on his beret. And it's something that he was very proud of, and I'd like to give that to you. Tommy. And Kimberly, believe it or not, honey, I remember your name. Because I remember when your dad got the letter that he had a baby girl. And that name has always stuck with me. And I now have a daughter I'm mighty proud of, too. I know your father is so proud of you, too.
The words and feelings all came out. And as the afternoon unfolded, Mrs. Bowman told Ed that, like her kids, she too felt relieved and grateful.
It was a good mission. Special Forces was a good mission. Special Forces was very close.
Ed told the Bowmans about the Special Forces A-Team and whatever he could remember about their father, about his courage, his willingness to step forward when others could not, and about that day in the rice paddy when Bowman saved his life.
So he moved forward himself, and then he set up a crossfire to take some relief off of me. And then I got out, and your dad got out. So that's what kind of a man he was.
For this Vietnam veteran, the vigil that began over Bowman's body that night in May 1965 was now over. Ed Morris could not save his friend's life, but his promise was at last fulfilled.
My God. It's kind of hard to talk after that one, Stone. Are these families staying in touch?
Well, they have stayed in touch. That night, Hugh, they kept talking for hours late into the night, and since then there have been letters and telephone calls back and forth between North Carolina and Idaho, and there are plans for the Bowman boys to visit Idaho for a hunting trip with Ed Morris. So they've stayed in touch.
That's wonderful. What effect has there been, or have you been able to notice on their emotional condition after meeting?
Well, Ed Morris's wife, Linda, says he's a changed man. Seems as if a burden has been lifted. And the Bowman kids say the same thing about their mother, that she is more at peace than she's been at years. So I think for both of these families, the emotional risk they took seems to have paid off.
Marvelous story. Thank you, Stone.
Well, next, Marilyn Monroe and Marie Antoinette, Bush and Dukakis together again, and all of this under one roof, where Bob Brown has your ticket to the world-renowned Madame Tussauds right after this.
For generations, it's nourished grandparents, grandchildren, and now their children's children. A breakfast Europeans have enjoyed for centuries, known in America as Kellogg's Mueslix, a natural balance of oats, wheat, rice, corn, barley, raisins, dates, and hazelnuts. Kellogg's Mueslix, 5-grain or bran, what breakfast was meant to be.
Have you ever noticed how cars mean a little more to some people than they do to others? Nissan has. That's why we build ours the way we do. We understand that a car fulfills a number of human needs. And transportation is only one of them. Nissan, built for the human race.
One love, get closer. When you're close up, that's when closer comes. One a cheap and a fresh mop. One love.
Get close up in paste, tartar control, and gel.
My dandruff shampoo is good.
Better try something else. Mine really works.
You'd better try something else, like Selsun Blue. Doctors recommend it more than all of the leading brands. None get rid of dandruff better than Selsun Blue.
Give me a head with hair, eyes with the perfect gleam. Dress them up, take them anywhere. These have been to the guillotine. This and more as Bob Brown visits Madame Tussauds when 2020 continues.
I got a confession to make. When it comes to the taste of sugar, I'm still 6 years old. Now, back then, I'd hold my breath until I got some sweets. And if that didn't work, I'd hold my little brother's breath. But he had teeth like a piranha. Oof. But now I'm all grown up, so I always use Equal. But if I can't get it, I don't hold my breath anymore. Now I hire somebody to do it for me.
Equal with NutraSweet. The taste you never outgrow.
The pilot's adage is any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Landings like this explain where that adage came from. 19-year-old Chris Spicer left home Monday for the start of college at Columbia State. He has not been seen since. And Steve Phillips will be along with some of the more human plays of the week, plays that prove not everyone belongs in the Hall of Fame. Good evening, I'm Bob Mueller. Join us for all the day's news, weather, and sports coming your way tonight on Channel 2 News at 10. We hope to see you then.
Research shows it's hard for you to switch banks, but with a little incentive from Dominion Premier Banking, the change is worth it.
Something fun's happening here weeknights at 6:30. It's Family Feud, and the survey says you're going to love it. Catch the feud here on WKRN Channel 2.
They are no dummies at Madame Tussauds. For over 200 years, they've had a money-making formula. Create a mold, pour some wax in, and another celebrity comes to life. Still life, that is. These are wax models that are a who's who of famous faces, past and present, and they're incredibly realistic. You can report sighting Elvis and not be laughed at. Well, now, appropriately enough, Madame Tussauds is often imitated, but in the whole world, the London Museum remains the most popular exhibition of its kind anywhere. Recently, we asked Bob Brown to find out why. He did. And in the process, a famous director gets one last cameo.
Alfred Hitchcock would have liked it. Men in white coats casually picking up a stiff in a deserted maze of a building. Where is all this leading? Upstairs to the attic. After a brief inspection under the skylights, Mr. Hitchcock will go off to a version of his own ultimate horror scene. This is actually routine maintenance work at the place where Alfred Hitchcock's wax likeness is seen by millions of people each year. It's one of around 350 figures on display at the most famous house of wax in the world, Madame Tussauds in London. Here, even the manager, Tony DaCosta, is represented by a wax figure at the top of the entrance stairs.
I guess the obvious question is, what is it like to come to work in the morning and see yourself here at the top of the stairs?
It's very strange, actually. Like looking in a mirror. When you look in a mirror, you can only see the front of you. But when you see the model, you see all around, so you know what you actually look like.
And for the famous, having your likeness on display is such a symbol of prestige that even people who don't normally go out in public can't resist dropping by the building on London's Marylebone Road to see themselves.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. It's perfect.
Many celebrities actually donate their own clothes for their wax counterparts, which are perfectly sized.
When you're hot, you're hot.
Appropriately for the new year, Madame Tussauds periodically must make room for the new by taking out the old. How do they decide who stays and who doesn't in 1989? And how is a new subject immortalized in wax? The answers, as we'll see, are eccentric and fascinating to the estimated 2.5 million yearly visitors who make this one of the top paid tourist attractions in Europe.
One Madame Tussaud, please.
They come to stare because wax models give them an element missing from photos and television, according to exhibition spokeswoman Juliet Simpkins.
3 dimensions is a very important. Our figures are obviously life-size and 3-dimensional. In an interesting sort of way, the visitor takes control of the famous person. You immediately are in this rather more positive role yourself. There is a fascination with famous people. I think that's true to say. Madame Tussaud recognized that all those years ago.
Madame Marie Tussaud. Her wax likeness appears at the entrance to one of the museum's galleries. If she doesn't look amused, it may be because of the way this all began in the late 1700s. Her uncle in Paris taught her how to model wax figures. She made several of the French royal family. But then her career took a macabre turn. During the Reign of Terror, following the French Revolution, when victim after victim went to the guillotine, she was assigned to make waxed death masks of freshly decapitated heads. Several of those heads from models she made are still on display here in the exhibition's Chamber of Horrors. Marie Antoinette and Louis XIV are among the ghastly wax likenesses with which Madame Tussaud toured the British Isles for years before she finally set up permanent shop in London. Many of the original models she made of her contemporaries remain on display. Benjamin Franklin posed for this likeness in 1783. Mr. Franklin is one of the permanent residents, but each month exhibition officials meet to determine which of the figures from today's headlines have lost some of the visibility that got them here. The figure of tennis star John McEnroe was removed in 1988, and who is now recognizable enough to fill the vacancy. Up in the exhibition sculpture room, we got a look at preparations for the New Year's arrivals. Norman Pierce was working on George Bush. He liked his high forehead.
And we suggest he's got some brains, isn't it?
And because our first visit was in advance of the presidential election, David Good was making a Michael Dukakis model. If you look at the photographs being used for a model of Sting, you begin to get an idea of what a sitting for a wax figure is like. The pictures are taken from all angles because the sculpture works in 3 dimensions, and calipers are used to make the physical measurements precise. A plaster mold is made from the finished clay head, and then in a place that looks a little like a medieval torture chamber, hot beeswax is finally poured into the mold.
He has to chill now for another hour.
Who's in there now?
Sonny Liston.
Sonny Liston?
Yeah.
Sonny Liston it was, the former world heavyweight champion. You never know when you'll need an old head again, which is why Madame Tussauds keeps all its molds in a warehouse. Sonny Liston was needed for a rock and roll exhibition that will recreate in wax figures the famous cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. After its molding, the head travels on to the hair and makeup room, where these artists give life and skin tone to the wax. Hands, too, are done from wax models. Those are Stevie Wonders you see on the counter. But the most tedious work of all is the process of inserting human hair into the model, hair by hair, for days on end. The finished figure costs around $20,000, accurate from head to toe. And in the case of this figure of Humphrey Bogart and this one of Pablo Picasso, even the cigarettes placed between their fingers are the right brands. The result? Some of the wax models are uncannily good. This figure of rock star Bob Geldof is startling when you round a corner and come across it. So is mystery writer Agatha Christie. But some don't look at all like you think they should. Ronald Reagan, for instance. His might have been better if he'd had time to pose for a sitting with one of the museum's sculptors. Instead, he sent a tie. Generally, however, these figures are lifelike enough so that if you sit still for a few seconds, people begin to wonder whether you're part of the exhibit. Doorman Ben Lyman says it happens to him all the time.
Well, had the odd punch and pinch and, you know, a little probe with the fingers to see how we wax or real, you know.
I tried standing for just a few seconds in one of the exhibit areas, and it didn't take long to be embarrassed because of it.
No, I'm real.
Nothing makes you feel more like a dummy than having to point out which is which.
He's whacked.
When you hot, you hot. I can hear. When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not.
As this new year dawned, we were also able to observe a kind of record set at Madame Tussaud's. Because the exhibition had commissioned figures of both Bush and Dukakis, they decided to display them together for a while.
Dukakis is lost.
I know, but he's the one who's won.
Yeah.
But as soon as the election was over, the figure of Mr. Dukakis was promptly swept out of the Wax Museum. The record? He was displayed for the shortest amount of time that anyone at Madame Tussauds is aware of.
When you're hot, you're hot.
If it's any consolation, he won't be melted. But like the others who've lost their places, he will go to the warehouse, where he will be held indefinitely for a comeback.
When you're hot, you're hot.
Well, now I'm here with the real live Bob Brown. Why is this place still a draw, Bob?
I really do think it has a lot to do with the fact that the figures are 3 dimensions. That's one thing you can't get, of course, on television or photographs, so you can actually walk up to them and stand around them as long as you want to and compare yourself in size if you want to. There's also the shock value of the Chamber of Horrors that appeals to a lot of people, but just don't let them catch you standing still inside.
They'll think you're one of them. Thank you, Bob.
Well, next, you met him here before. Then he was pitching a con job. Now he's marking time. Details to follow.
Every night while you're sleeping, UPS is maintaining its status as the only company that delivers overnight to every address coast to coast. And we guarantee it with UPS Next Day Air. And because we're so efficient, we'll still do it for up to half what other companies charge, which is guaranteed to cause our competition some sleepless nights. UPS, we run the tightest ship in the shipping business.
Once there were no 12-hour cold medicines with a pain reliever for fever and body aches. But now there are plenty to choose from. Drixoro Plus from Drixoro, the pharmacist's favorite.
Now you can eat a whole Sara Lee coffee cake all by yourself. New individual coffee cakes.
Nobody doesn't like Sara Lee.
Jeep Cherokee has available 4-wheel anti-lock brakes. The most powerful engine in its class. Full-time 4-wheel drive capability. And room for 5. Being superior in these areas makes Cherokee superior in these areas.
Save up to $1,600 on select 1989 Jeep Cherokee.
Do you love shrimp? Red Lobster's got it. Lots of shrimp at a great price. Don't miss it. The Shrimp Spectacular Platter, just $7.95. Shrimp 4 different ways, all on one plate. Crispy fried, spicy Cajun popcorn, zesty lemon pepper, and presenting our delicious new grilled shrimp. That's the Shrimp Spectacular Platter, just $7.95. Kids shrimp, $1.95. But hurry, or you'll miss it at Red Lobster. And for all your football parties, call for Party Platters to go, ready in just 1 hour.
Monday, Ryan has AIDS, with the town against her.
It's a petition to keep Ryan White out of school.
She found the strength to go on.
You'll take Ryan's case?
Yes. Based on a true story. Who's the Boss's Judith Light? The Ryan White story. Monday.
We both pretend we've never met. Can you do that?
I don't think so. I must have met you. I can still picture you naked.
If they weren't having so much fun, you'd think they were still married.
I'd give it to you now.
Wednesday, a special preview of A Fine Romance.
The owner of a company that may have defrauded job seekers of over $25 million is in a California prison tonight. And we like to think John Stossel played a role. It was last April that we aired Real Jobs or Con Jobs. Michael B. Marks's company, Overseas Unlimited, charged thousands of people up to $550 each, supposedly to match them with high-paying jobs abroad. But to Mr. Marks, a match did not necessarily mean a job.
Come on, when you say successfully matched 70,000 clients with overseas positions, it sounds like they got jobs.
Well, let me say for the record that we don't intend for it to sound like they've gotten jobs.
And most of them didn't. Well, now the company is out of business. And Mr. Marks, well, as we reported, he had been on probation for a previous conviction of mail fraud. And recently, a judge ruled that this latest scam violated the terms of Mr. Marks's probation and ordered him to complete a 5-year prison term. Well, now let's see what Ted Koppel has for us on tonight's Nightline. Ted?
Barbara, to mark Elvis Presley's birthday earlier this week, our story tonight is on the musical fountain that gave Presley his roots and is still flowing today. B.B. King and Wynton Marsalis join us as we focus on the blues. Hugh?
That's Nightline after your local news. And that's 2020 for tonight. We thank you for joining us.
And remember, we're in touch, so you be in touch. I'm Barbara Walters.
And I'm Hugh Downs.
And for all of us here at 2020, good night.
Maybe you missed the article about oat bran in USA Today. Maybe you turned right past the one in Newsweek. And maybe all the other articles about oat bran somehow escaped your attention. But if you'd like to know how oat bran can be important to your health, here's something you should read. A box of Kellogg's Common Sense Oat Bran, with more oat bran than any leading ready-to-eat cereal. New Common Sense Oat Bran, a sensible thing to do.
If for years you've been itching to get relief from the discomfort of a dry nose, here's some good news. Nasal. It's not a decongestant. Nasal's a gentle moisturizing spray that soothes away dryness. So gentle that you can use Nasal as often as you like. So the next time your dry nose needs soothing relief, try Nasal moisturizing spray. It's what every dry nose has been itching for.
Saturday, George Siegel's movie.
FBI, you're under arrest.
Care to comment?
Aloha. It's a new time to watch Murphy's Law.
Oh, Murph, this is great.
This Saturday, now at 10, 9 Central.
Some men are just too tough to kill. Schwarzenegger, raw deal.
Do you think I still pass the physical?
Sunday.
A Metro judge sends the landfill controversy back to square one. There are new charges of sexual misconduct concerning a top prison employee, and a well-known coach plans to rock the world of college basketball. Good evening, I'm Bob Mueller. Those stories and more next on Channel 2 News.
Is 2020.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.
This is ABC.